This is the little-known story of the German U-boat off the east coast of the United States during World War II. Fort Miles versus U-boats at U.S. shores. The story begins about 20-some years before, with the German U-boats in World War I. Germany was the first country to employ submarines in war as substitutes for surface commerce raiders. At the outset of World War I, German U-boats, though numbering only 38, achieved notable successes against British warships, but because of the reactions of neutral powers, especially the United States, Germany hesitated before adopting unrestricted U-boat warfare against merchant ships. Unrestricted U-boat warfare meant they did not merely target military ships, but also commercial ships, including passenger ships. Any ship in international waters was at risk of being sunk by a U-boat. The Lusitania in 1916 was the most infamous merchant ship sunk during World War I, and that was one of the causes of the U.S. entering the war in 1917. The decision to do so in February 1917 by Germany was largely responsible for the entry of the U.S. into the war. The U-boat campaign then became a race between German sinkings of merchant ships and the buildings of ships, mainly in the United States, to replace them. Here we see an image of a German World War I U-boat. In April 1917, 430 Allied and neutral ships totaling 852,000 tons were sunk, and it seemed likely that the German gamble would succeed. However, the introduction of convoys, those were large groups of ships that were covered by military ships, the arrival of numerous U.S. destroyers, and the vast output of American shipyards turned the tables. By the end of the war, Germany had built 334 U-boats and had 226 more under construction. The peak U-boat strength of 140 was reached in October 1917, about 1 year before the end of the war, but there were never more than about 60 at sea at one time. World War I ended in November of 1918, and the armistice terms required Germany to surrender all its U-boats, and the later Treaty of Versailles forbade it to possess them in the future. In 1935, however, under Adolf Hitler, Germany repudiated the treaty and forcefully negotiated the right to build U-boats again. And now we have the story of the World War II U-boats. World War II began in September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. In World War II, Germany built 1,162 U-boats, of which 785 were destroyed and the remainder surrendered or were scuttled to avoid surrender at capitulation. Of the 632 U-boats sunk at sea, Allied surface ships and shore-based aircraft accounted for the great majority. And here we see depictions of the World War II era German U-boats, from the much smaller ones to the large, heavy U-boats. Now, it is commonly thought in the United States today that World War II did not get any closer than Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, but that's not true. Losses off the U.S. East Coast were overwhelming in 1942 during Operation Drumbeat and its successor operations. But U-boats visited the East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico in America throughout the war. The USS Eagle PE-56 exploded and sank off Cape Elizabeth, Maine on April 23, 1945, killing most of its crew in New England's worst naval disaster during World War II. And this was just a few weeks before the end of the war. The sinking of the USS Eagle was originally blamed on a boiler explosion, but the Navy determined in 2001 that it had been sunk by a German submarine. And here you have an Eagle-class patrol boat of the type that was sunk by the Germans. This is a map of Fort Miles in Delaware, the focus of our story. Here you see the mighty guns built at the fort, facing out to sea. During the winter of 1941-1942, soon after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, Germany sent 5 submarines to attack the east coast of the United States. The attack, codenamed Operation Drumbeat by the Germans, lasted more than 6 months, killed more than 6,000 sailors, and sank more than 300 ships. It was an Allied disaster, one that most Americans know little about to this day. It was the first major attack on our homeland. Here you see a depiction of the ships hit by U-boats off the U.S. East Coast and the Gulf of Mexico, stretching all the way into Canada and all the way down to South Florida and almost to the Texas coast. Here we see a depiction of the German U-boats just off of New York Harbor. You see they're north in New York, southerly toward New Jersey, and even down there in Delaware, where Fort Miles was constructed. Here we see the U-boats lost over the U.S. East Coast. The German Navy launched its final attack, codenamed Operation Seawolf, on our East Coast in the closing days of World War II. A few months before the war ended, May 8, 1945, the German Navy sent 6 boats from bases in Norway to attack our coast. The U-853 and U-858 were part of that attack, while U-853 sank one of the last ships destroyed in World War II, the collier Black Point, near the entrance to Long Island Sound. Remember, we saw that map of U-boats based outside of New York. It was attacked on May 5th to 6th, 1945 by 4 American hunter-killers and became the last U-boat destroyed in U.S. waters. On May 14, 1945, its sister ship, the U-858, surrendered at Fort Miles. Remarkably, the U-858 was the first enemy combatant to surrender to the continental United States since the War of 1812. And here we see a depiction of the U-boat. Another one. U-853 continued its attack on the East Coast as part of Operation Seawolf. U-853 attacked USS Eagle-Boat 56 near Portland, Maine, and destroyed it. The submarine spotted the collier Black Point near the entrance to Long Island Sound and torpedoed it, blowing off its stern and killing 14 of its 46-man crew. The Black Point became the last ship sunk in U.S. waters in World War II. U-853 in shallow water ran to reach safer deep water to elude American warships, but lost the race. Unknown to U-853, a recent convoy had just arrived in American waters, and its 3 anti-submarine warfare escorts were immediately ordered to find the escaping U-boat and attack it. 7 miles east of Block Island, Rhode Island, the American hunter-killers found the U-853, and the attack began the night of May 5th, 1945. Joined by 2 blimps from Lakehurst, New Jersey. With their 7.2-inch rocket bombs, the American force unleashed a withering attack on the submerged boat. After raining down 264 Hedgehogs, 195 depth charges, and 6 rocket bombs from the 2 blimps, the U-853 was finally destroyed on May 6, 1945, and became the final resting tomb in 121 feet of water for its crew of 55. And here we see a photograph of the wreck of the submarine U-853 at the bottom of the Atlantic. Here are the Hedgehog bombs. They're launched to go forward of the launching ship and intended to hit the submarine and blow it up. Here we see depth charges. Those are dropped from attacking ships, and as they drop down into the water, when the water pressure reaches a certain point, it explodes the depth charge, with the idea being that the underwater concussion will damage or destroy the U-boat. Fort Miles. Fort Miles was a United States Army World War II installation located on Cape Henlopen near Lewes, Delaware. Although funds to build the fort were approved in 1934, it was 1938 before construction began on the fort. So this is a fort built specifically for U.S. defense during the era of World War II. And here we see a map of Delaware where the fort is located right there at the tip of the opening of the bay. The outbreak of war in Europe in September 1939 and the fall of France in June 1940 greatly accelerated U.S. defense planning and funding. On July 27, 1940, the Army's Harbor Defense Board recommended the construction of 27, eventually 38, 16-inch 2-gun batteries to protect strategic points along the U.S. coastline to be casemated against air attack. 2 of these batteries were to be at Fort Miles. The attack on Pearl Harbor accelerated construction and other activity at the fort. The U.S. declaration of war on Japan compelled the U.S. Army to continue to garrison the fort, with the 261st Coast Artillery Battalion, who days before were slated to leave. 14 vessels, including USS Jacob Jones, a U.S. Navy destroyer, were sunk off the coast of New Jersey during the first 6 months of 1942. Here we have a photograph of the observation tower at Fort Miles, where an observer could see the coastline and any attacking ships coming in toward the fort. Here's one of the fort's 12-inch guns. Here's the 16-inch gun we heard about. Numerous batteries of guns up to the 16-inchers were installed at the fort, and a large minefield was laid in the waters off of Lewes, Delaware in the following years. But fortunately, the fort was to see no action during the conflict. At its peak, Fort Miles was home to over 2,200 soldiers, men and women, including numerous artillery regiments. Fort Miles never saw any major action during World War II, but it did fire its guns many times in practice and achieved high marksmanship ratings, but never used those guns to engage an enemy. Perhaps the enemy knew not to go there. But closer to home here in Florida, there was numerous U-boat activities. Activities people don't remember today. People packed the pier on Jacksonville Beach on a warm evening in the spring of 1942. As the war in Europe raged, Americans felt safe at home. Then, without warning, a tremendous explosion echoed across the water. At first, everybody thought two oil tankers had collided in the busy shipping lanes just miles from shore. Freighter traffic was a common sight as the U.S. struggled to keep its ally Great Britain supplied with oil, aluminum, and other goods necessary for the fight against Nazi Germany. Here we see a flaming merchant ship off the coast of Florida. Then a German submarine surfaced between the packed pier and burning ship, finishing the stricken vessel off with its deck gun. The sinking of the Gulf America, an 8,000-ton steam tanker on its maiden voyage from Port Arthur, Texas to New York City, just miles off the crowded boardwalk, is probably the most famous battle in a U-boat war few know was waged so close to Florida's shores. The Germans sank their first ship in the Gulf of Mexico on May 4, 1942, when U-507 torpedoed the freighter Norlindo, west-northwest of Key West. U-boats sank an average of about one ship per day that month. A headline from the July 19, 1942 edition of the St. Petersburg Times proclaimed, "Ship toll passes 400 mark." The Germans sank their last ship in the Gulf of Mexico on September 4, 1942. But the war in the North Atlantic continued into the following year. Eventually, the convoy system, combined with the use of attack aircraft and fast surface vessels, turned the tide against the Germans. And here we see an American ship stricken in the water, its crew in a lifeboat floating away. And what's the relevance of all of this today? Do we have U-boats patrolling off American shores today? Here's a headline in the New York Times, August 4th, 2009. Russian subs patrolling off east coast of U.S. A pair of nuclear-powered Russian attack submarines has been patrolling off the eastern seaboard of the United States in recent days, a rare mission that has raised concern inside the Pentagon and intelligence agencies about a more assertive stance by the Russian military. The collapse of the Soviet Union back in 1991 all but eliminated the ability of the Russian Navy to operate far from home ports, making the current submarine patrols thousands of miles from Russia more surprising for military officials. I don't think they put two first-line nuclear subs off the U.S. coast in about 15 years, said one submarine warfare expert. The submarines are of the Akula class, a counterpart to the Los Angeles class attack subs of the United States Navy, and not one of the larger submarines that can launch intercontinental nuclear missiles. According to Defense Department officials, one of the Russian submarines remained in international waters, about 200 miles off the coast of the United States. The location of the second remained unclear. One of the submarines is the newer Akula II, officials said, which is quieter than the older variant and the most advanced in the Russian fleet. The Akula is capable of carrying torpedoes for attacking other submarines and surface vessels, as well as missiles for striking targets on land and at sea. While the submarines have not taken any provocative action beyond their presence outside territorial waters of the U.S., officials expressed wariness over the Kremlin's motivation for ordering such an unusual mission. The official said the Navy was able to track the submarines as they made their way through international waters off the American coastline. This can be done from aircraft, ships, underwater sensors, or other submarines. We've known where they were, and we're not concerned about our ability to track the subs, the official added. We're concerned just because they are there. So is that the current state? That we will always know where they were and will be able to track enemy subs? Well, just 3 years later, August 14th, 2012, the headline reads, Russian attack submarines sailed in Gulf of Mexico undetected for weeks, U.S. officials say. A Russian nuclear-powered attack submarine armed with long-range cruise missiles operated undetected in the Gulf of Mexico for several weeks, and its travel in strategic U.S. waters was only confirmed after it left the region. It is only the second time since 2009 that a Russian attack submarine has patrolled so close to U.S. shores. And here we see the Russian Akula submarine. The submarine patrol exposed what U.S. officials said were deficiencies in U.S. anti-submarine warfare capabilities. The Navy is in charge of detecting submarines, especially those that sail near U.S. nuclear missile submarines, and uses undersea sensors and satellites to locate and track them. The fact that the Akula was not detected in the Gulf is cause for concern. Officials said the vessel was a nuclear-powered Akula-class attack submarine, one of Russia's quietest submarines. One official said the Akula operated without being detected for a month. The Akula was built for one reason and one reason only, to kill U.S. Navy ballistic missile submarines and their crews. It's a very stealthy boat, so it can sneak around and avoid detection and hope to get past any protective screen a boomer might have in place, referring to the Navy nickname for strategic missile submarines. The U.S. Navy operates a strategic nuclear submarine base at Kings Bay, Georgia. The base is home port to 8 missile-firing submarines, 6 of them equipped with nuclear-tipped missiles, and 2 armed with conventional warhead missiles. Here we see a map of the Kings Bay submarine base in Georgia, and a photograph of the base. And here we see one of the U.S. guided missile submarines operating out of the base, perhaps one of the intended victims of the Russian Akula attack submarine. So here we are, over a century after the end of World War I, long after the World War I U-boats patrolled, over 75 years after the German U-boats were sinking U.S. shipping right off our coastline. And still we have enemy submarines patrolling close to our shores, unbeknownst to the public and officials. So let us all pay close attention because the story of Fort Miles versus the U-boats continues today and is still of great public concern to all U.S. citizens.